The Arizona Territory, 1883. A young widow named Sarah Thornton shivers in a crumbling cabin at the edge of Apache land. Her husband's death left her with nothing but debts, and her family's verdict was swift and cold. She's worthless now. No sons, no skills, no future. The townsfolk whisper she won't last a week. When the roof caves in during a sudden storm, Sarah works through tears and rain, her hands bleeding on splintered wood. She doesn't notice the tall figure watching from the tree line, a man the settlers call the Shadow, an Apache craftsman who has lost his own family to the same prejudice that now threatens to break her. He steps forward, offering not charity but partnership. What could compel an Apache man to help a white woman when both their worlds have given them every reason to hate? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been Mrs. Thomas Thornton, a name that carried weight in Copper Springs. Not that it had ever felt like her own. At 17, she'd been handed over with a handshake between her father and Gerald Thornton, the territory's most prosperous merchant. A business arrangement sealed with a gold band that now hung loose on her thinning finger. Stand up straight, Sarah. Her mother-in-law would remind her daily. A merchant's wife represents his success. Margaret Thornton had been correcting her posture, her speech, her cooking, and her existence for 5 years. The daguerreotype on the mantel showed them all smiling, Thomas with his hand on her shoulder, his parents flanking them like sentries. The photographer had asked them to hold still for nearly a minute. Her cheeks had ached from the false smile. "Do you need anything from town?" Thomas would ask, already reaching for his hat, already half out the door. He preferred the saloon to their well-appointed home, the company of strangers to hers. "Just some sugar, if you don't mind." Her requests were always small, unobtrusive. He'd nod, sometimes press dry lips to her forehead, and be gone until the small hours. She'd learned not to wait up, not to notice the scent of whiskey and perfume that wasn't hers. Sarah kept the house, managed the accounts that Thomas neglected, and endured the endless disappointment that she had not yet produced an heir. Each monthly blood was a silent accusation. "Perhaps if you ate more meat," Margaret would suggest. Or if Thomas spent more evenings at home. Neither mentioned the empty bottles she discreetly removed each morning. The day of the accident had been ordinary. Thomas left after breakfast for a supply run to the next town. His father needed inventory for the store, winter supplies, fabric, ammunition. The wagon was heavy, the trail steep in places. Sheriff Miller arrived as she was preparing supper. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, hat in hand. "There's been an accident on Miller's Ridge." The wagon had overturned on a sharp bend. Thomas had been thrown. The horses returned to town without him, dragging splintered wood and scattered goods. "He didn't suffer," the sheriff offered, though how could he know? The truth emerged in pieces after the funeral. The banker appeared first, then the saloon owner, followed by a woman Sarah had never met who wore too much rouge and couldn't meet her eyes. Thomas had borrowed against the house, lost money at cards, made promises he couldn't keep. "He was a good customer," the saloon owner said, presenting a promissory note in Thomas's uneven hand. "But business is business, Mrs. Thornton." Gerald and Margaret received the news with tight lips and calculating eyes. "The store cannot absorb these debts," Gerald announced over tea that Sarah's shaking hands could barely pour. "And you brought no dowry to speak of." "Perhaps my brother in Tucson," Sarah ventured. "We've already written," Margaret cut in. "He cannot help." That evening, after a hushed conversation behind closed doors, they summoned her to Gerald's study. "The situation is untenable," Gerald said, not looking up from his ledger. "We cannot maintain another household." "What Gerald means," Margaret added, her voice softened with practiced sympathy, "is that with no children and no means, you have become a burden," Gerald finished. "I can work," Sarah offered. "In the store, perhaps." Gerald's laugh held no humor. "And remind everyone of Thomas's failings? I think not. The house must be sold to settle the debts," Margaret explained. And we cannot accommodate you indefinitely. You're saying I should leave? Sarah's voice sounded distant to her own ears. You're young enough, Gerald said, finally meeting her eyes. Perhaps another match could be arranged, though without a dowry. She's worthless now, Margaret murmured, as if Sarah weren't present. No man of standing would consider it. They gave her a week to pack her belongings, what few were truly hers, and a small sum that would see her through a month if she was frugal. No one in town would meet her eyes as she inquired about work, lodging, any possibility of remaining in the place she'd called home for 5 years. It's nothing personal, Mrs. Watkins from the boarding house explained, turning her away. But I run a respectable establishment. A widow with debts attracts talk. By the end of the week, Sarah had only one option left: a tumble-down cabin on unclaimed land at the edge of town, near the boundary that separated settlement from Apache territory. The last place anyone wanted to be. You won't last a month out there, Margaret predicted as Sarah loaded her single trunk onto a borrowed cart. When you come to your senses, perhaps the Sisters of Mercy in Tucson will take you in. Sarah didn't answer. The gold band weighed heavy in her pocket as she set out, alone for the first time in her life. The cabin had been abandoned for years. Whoever built it hadn't returned, likely claimed by the harsh land or driven away by fear of Apache raids. Tales that kept settlers clustered close to town. Sarah stood before it, cart handle still warm in her palm, and fought the urge to turn back. One room, dirt floor, a stone fireplace with half the chimney crumbled away. The roof sagged dangerously in one corner where water damage had rotted the timbers. A broken chair, a rough-hewn table, and a metal-framed cot with no mattress were all that remained of the previous occupant. "Home," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. Inside, she set her trunk against the wall least likely to collapse and removed the single treasure she'd managed to salvage: a bone china teacup, part of a set her grandmother had brought west. The rest had been sold to settle Thomas's debts. She placed it carefully on the windowsill, its delicate blue flowers a defiant splash of civilization. That first night, Sarah slept on her folded quilt atop the bare cot frame, jumping at every sound the wind through gaps in the walls, animals rustling in the underbrush, imagined footsteps. At dawn, she woke stiff and hollow-eyed, but alive. Water was her first challenge. The creek behind the cabin ran clear but required a steep descent down a rocky slope. Sarah's first attempt to carry a full bucket back up ended with scraped knees, soaked skirts, and an empty pail. She sat on a rock and permitted herself exactly 3 minutes of tears before trying again. On her third attempt, she managed half a bucket, enough to wash her face and hands and make a thin tea from her dwindling supplies. By the second day, her arms ached, but she could carry a full bucket without spilling more than a cup or two. Food was next. Her provisions would last 2 weeks if stretched. The wild onions growing near the creek went into a thin soup. She eyed the woods for berries, but fear kept her close to the cabin. Apache land lay beyond, or so she'd been told, though she'd never seen one of the dreaded savages herself. On her fourth day, necessity drove Sarah back toward town. She wore her best remaining dress, patched but still respectable, and pinned her hair neatly beneath her bonnet. Perhaps someone would offer work, now that she'd shown her determination to survive independently. The general store fell silent as she entered. Mrs. Peterson, arranging dry goods, suddenly found the task required her full attention. Mr. Wilson behind the counter met her eyes briefly, then looked away. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice too loud in the hushed space. "I was wondering if anyone might need help with sewing or laundry. I'm quite skilled and my rates would be reasonable." Mrs. Peterson's back stiffened. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. "Don't believe so, Mrs. Thornton. Times are tight for everyone." A woman Sarah had once taken tea with weakly exited hurriedly, not acknowledging her presence. Outside, Sarah approached the boarding house where she'd once organized charity suppers. Mrs. Watkins' daughter answered her knock. "Mama's not receiving today," the girl said, then whispered, "They say misfortune follows widows who can't keep their husbands alive. Like bad luck might catch, you understand?" Sarah understood. Poverty and misfortune terrified these people more than Apache raids or desert scorpions. They'd built lives on the precarious edge of civilization. One push could send any of them tumbling into her circumstances. She walked to the far end of town where the Chinese laundry operated. Mr. Wong, himself an outsider, at least met her eyes. "No work today, Mrs. Thornton. Perhaps next week." His kindness, the perhaps, nearly undid her composure. With the last of her ready money, she purchased cornmeal, beans, salt, and matches. The supplies would stretch her provisions another 2 weeks. After that, she was halfway back to the cabin when Gerald Thornton's wagon passed her on the road. He didn't slow or acknowledge her, but his foreman riding alongside gave her a long look that made her skin crawl. That night, Sarah inventoried her skills by candlelight. She could cook, clean, sew, read, write, and manage household accounts. None of these seemed particularly useful for surviving alone in the wilderness. For the first time, she considered the money remaining from the sale of her grandmother's china. Perhaps enough for a stagecoach ticket to Tucson and the mercy of strangers, or the Sisters of Mercy, as Margaret had suggested. The thought stiffened her spine. She would not give Margaret the satisfaction. A sudden crack from outside sent her heart racing. Animal or man, she had no way to defend herself. The cabin didn't even have a proper door, just a ragged blanket she'd hung across the opening. Sarah grabbed the fire poker and waited, barely breathing. The night passed without further incident, but sleep eluded her. At first light, she noticed something unexpected by the blanket door, a handmade willow basket, tightly woven and perfectly formed. Inside lay 2 desert hare, already skinned, and a handful of unfamiliar roots. Sarah looked toward the tree line but saw only the rising sun casting long shadows. Someone had been watching her struggle. Someone had decided to help. She wasn't entirely alone after all. The mysterious gift changed something in Sarah. She'd been surviving. Now she began to live. The hare meat, stretched with wild onions and the strange roots, which tasted like earthy potatoes, provided 3 solid meals. She kept the willow basket, admiring its craftsmanship. Each reed had been split to exactly the same width, the weaving so tight it could hold water. 2 weeks became a month. Sarah established routines that measured her days. Dawn, collect water. Morning, gather wood, check for edible plants, repair the cabin. Afternoon, attempt to hunt, mostly unsuccessfully, with a crude slingshot she'd fashioned. Evening, prepare food, reinforce the blanket door, listen to the encroaching darkness. She grew leaner, stronger, her hands calloused and sure. The woman who had poured tea in a merchant's parlor was vanishing, replaced by someone who could build a fire in wind and rain, who knew which plants brought rash and which brought sustenance. Necessity taught her quickly. When a section of roof collapsed during a rare thunderstorm, she dragged fallen branches to the cabin, determined to build a ladder to reach the damage. Her first attempt collapsed under her weight. Her second held, though the repaired roof leaked steadily in 3 places rather than one torrential spot. Progress, she told the empty room, her grandmother's teacup catching one persistent drip. Every few days, Sarah ventured to the ridge overlooking her small valley. From there, she could see thin wisps of smoke from distant cookfires deeper in Apache territory. Once, she glimpsed figures on horseback moving along a far ridge. They were too distant to make out clearly, but their straight backs and easy horsemanship told her these were not settlers. Her monthly trips to town grew less fraught. If people still whispered about the widow who went native, at least they took her money for supplies. Mr. Wong at the laundry finally offered her mending work, shirts, and trousers from the miners too damaged for his regular customers. The pay was meager but welcome. "You look strong now," he observed as she collected her first earnings. "Desert makes soft things hard or dead things." Sarah recognized the assessment as a compliment. "I'm learning," she replied. "Learning good. Apache teach many things if you listen." She stiffened. "I haven't seen any Apache." Mr. Wong's expression didn't change. "They see you." Walking home, Sarah felt unseen eyes tracking her progress. not threatening but evaluating. When she reached the cabin, another gift awaited, a bundle of dried meat strips seasoned with unfamiliar spices. She looked toward the tree line and, for the first time, called out, "Thank you." Only birdsong answered, but she was certain her benefactor had heard. That night, Sarah dreamed of her former life, Margaret Thornton's cutting voice, Thomas's indifferent touch, the weight of others' expectations. She woke feeling as though she'd escaped a cage whose bars she'd never fully recognized. The next morning, she decided to address her door problem. The blanket offered no real protection from weather or intruders. Using salvaged boards and her growing skill with hammer and nails, she constructed a rudimentary door that hung crookedly but swung on leather hinges and could be barred from inside. She was admiring her handiwork when movement at the forest edge caught her eye. A tall figure stood watching a man with long black hair and copper skin, dressed in buckskin and carrying a bow. Their eyes met across 30 yards of open ground. Neither moved. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Every story she'd heard about Apache warriors flashed through her mind. Scalping, torture, women carried off. But this man had been leaving her food, helping her survive. She raised her hand in tentative greeting. The man remained motionless for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly before melting back into the trees. That night, Sarah barred her new door and sat with her back to the wall, the fire poker across her lap. But no threat materialized, and eventually exhaustion claimed her. Dawn brought another gift, a deerskin bundle containing a bone needle, sinew thread, and a small knife with a handle carved from antler. Tools, not just food. Means to greater self-sufficiency. As Sarah examined the knife's perfect balance and keen edge, she realized the truth of her situation. She was being watched, evaluated, and for some reason helped. The Apache man didn't want to drive her away or harm her. He seemed to be teaching her. 2 days later, Sarah used the knife to dig a small garden beside the cabin, planting corn and bean seeds she'd bought in town. When she went to the creek for water, she discovered a fish trap that hadn't been there before. A clever arrangement of stones creating a pool where fish could swim in but struggled to exit. She looked up at the surrounding trees. "I don't know why you're helping me," she called, "but I'm grateful." A bird called from the forest canopy, then fell silent. Sarah filled her water bucket and returned to her work, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, no longer frightening, but almost comforting. 2 months into Sarah's exile, the weather turned. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains, bringing a heaviness to the air that made her joints ache like an old woman's. By midday, the sky had darkened to a threatening purple-black. The wind rose, bending the pines and sending loose items skittering across the yard she'd painstakingly cleared. Sarah rushed to secure what little she had, gathering kindling under the cabin's small overhang, bringing in the drying herbs she'd been learning to use, checking her water barrels. The first fat raindrops struck her face as she hammered a loose board back into place beside her door. Then the storm truly arrived. Rain hammered the cabin like gunfire. Wind found every gap in her imperfect repairs, sending icy drafts swirling around her ankles. Sarah fed the fireplace carefully, aware that her wood supply needed to last. If the deluge continued, gathering more would be impossible. The first leak appeared above the table, a steady drip that soon became a stream. Sarah positioned her bucket underneath and moved her few possessions away from the spreading puddle. A second leak formed near the fireplace, threatening to extinguish her precious fire. She used her cooking pot to catch that one. A tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, and then came the sound she'd been dreading, the rending tier of timber giving way. The patched section of roof she'd repaired so inadequately sagged inward, water pouring through a gap now large enough to put her arm through. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, panic rising in her throat. Without shelter, survival became impossible. Everything she'd built these past months would wash away. Desperation drove her outside into the storm's fury. The ladder she'd constructed leaned against the cabin wall, a flimsy thing of lashed branches. Rain instantly plastered her clothing to her skin, her hair coming loose in sodden strands. The wind nearly took her feet from under her as she positioned the ladder beneath the damaged section. The climb was terrifying. The ladder swayed with each gust. The wet would slick beneath her hands. Reaching the roof, Sarah saw the full extent of the damage. The repaired section had pulled away from the main beam, creating a widening hole that would soon compromise the entire structure. She'd brought rope and the hammer, but now realized the futility of her plan. The rain made the roof treacherously slippery. The wind threatened to tear her from her precarious perch, and her hands were already numb with cold. Still, she had to try. Sarah hammered a nail into what seemed like solid wood, tied one end of her rope to it, and attempted to pull the broken section back into alignment. The nail pulled free instantly, sending her sliding several feet toward the edge. She barely caught herself, gasping as the rough shingles scraped her palms raw. "Help me," she whispered, though there was no one to hear, or so she thought. A sudden grip on her ankle made her cry out. Looking down, she found herself staring into the dark eyes of the Apache man. He stood atop her ladder, one hand steadying her, the other holding something, a carved wooden tool she didn't recognize. "Down," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "Not safe." Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. The man descended first, then held the ladder steady as she made her way down on trembling legs. Once on solid ground, she turned to face him properly. He stood a head taller than her, his black hair pulled back with a leather thong, his face weathered but youthful. Perhaps 30 years, she guessed. His clothing was a mix of traditional buckskin and what appeared to be a settler's cotton shirt beneath a hide vest. A knife hung at his belt, but he carried no other visible weapons. "Your roof," he said, pointing. "Bad fixing." Despite everything, Sarah felt a flash of indignation. "I've never built a roof before." A hint of something, amusement, flickered in his eyes. "Yes, I see this." He moved past her to examine the cabin, seemingly unbothered by the rain still pouring down. After a moment, he returned to the ladder and climbed up with an agility that made her earlier attempt seem clumsy. Using the wooden tool, a kind of split-pronged device, he began working at the damaged section, his movements sure despite the storm's fury. Sarah stood, helplessly below, water running in rivulets down her face. "What should I do?" she called up. He glanced down. "Inside. Make fire strong. Bring water soon." She hesitated, reluctant to leave the stranger working on her home, yet aware she was contributing nothing by standing in the rain. With a last glance up at his steady, methodical movements, she retreated inside. The fire had nearly died. Sarah built it back carefully, adding the driest wood from her dwindling supply. She wrung out her hair and changed into her only other dress behind the privacy of a hung blanket, acutely aware of the man on her roof. For nearly an hour, she heard him moving above, hammering, scraping, working even as the storm raged on. Eventually, the leak slowed, then stopped altogether. When the patter of footsteps on the roof ceased, Sarah waited anxiously by the door. He appeared like a spirit from the gray curtain of rain, carrying something wrapped in hide. Without asking permission, he entered her cabin, bringing the smell of wet earth and pine with him. Water dripped from his clothes onto her dirt floor as he knelt by the fire, unwrapping his bundle to reveal more tools, a stone hammer, wooden pegs, a coil of what looked like plant fiber rope. Sarah stood frozen, unsure of protocol when an Apache warrior invites himself into your home. He seemed unconcerned with her presence, arranging his tools with methodical care before looking up at her. "Roof fixed for now. Need better work when rain stops." His English was broken but clear, each word carefully formed as if retrieved from memory. "Thank you," Sarah said, finding her voice. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Thornton." He studied her face for a long moment. "White people have many names. What should I call you?" she asked. Another pause. "My people call me Takwa. Means running wolf in your tongue." "Running wolf," she repeated. "Thank you for helping me." He nodded once, then pointed to her hands. "You hurt." Sarah looked down, surprised to see blood mixed with dirt on her palms from her fall on the roof. In the crisis, she hadn't noticed the pain. "It's nothing," she said, though now that he'd mentioned it, the stinging became apparent. Without asking permission, Running Wolf reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew a bundle of dried herbs. He gestured toward her water bucket. "May I?" he asked, the courtesy surprising her. Sarah nodded, and he poured a small amount of water into a wooden cup he produced from somewhere within his vest. He added the herbs, crushed them with his finger, and let the mixture steep while he examined her cabin with careful eyes. "You live alone," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Why?" The directness startled her. Settler women weren't asked to explain themselves to strange men, especially not those from enemy tribes. Yet the question held no threat, only curiosity. "My husband died. His family didn't want me anymore." Running Wolf's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "They throw you away." The blunt assessment made Sarah wince. "They said I was worthless now." He made a sound, something between a scoff and a grunt. "White people waste much." He offered her the cup. "For hands. Will clean, stop pain." Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting. The liquid was bitter, earthy, with a hint of something like mint. Following his gesture, she poured some over her scraped palms, suppressing a gasp at the immediate sting that quickly faded to coolness. "Hold out hands," he instructed. When she complied, he took a small piece of soft hide from his pouch and gently dabbed her palms dry. His touch was impersonal, clinical, yet Sarah found herself acutely aware of the calluses on his fingers, the careful way he avoided causing further pain. "Thank you," she said again, withdrawing her hands perhaps too quickly. Running Wolf nodded, then returned to studying the cabin. "Roof holds tonight. Tomorrow I bring better tools." "You don't have to." "Winter comes," he interrupted. "Bad shelter means death." The stark reality silenced her protest. He was right. Without proper repairs, she wouldn't survive the colder months ahead. "Why are you helping me?" She finally asked the question that had plagued her for weeks. Running Wolf was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his words were measured. "My wife, my son. Army soldiers came 5 winters ago." He made a chopping motion with his hand. "All gone. Some Apache want all white people dead. Some white people want all Apache dead." He looked directly into her eyes. "Both sides lose everything this way." Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm sorry about your family." He accepted this with a slight inclination of his head. "You are alone. I am alone. Land provides for those who listen." It wasn't really an answer, yet somehow it explained everything. They were 2 solitary figures in a harsh landscape, and he had chosen cooperation over conflict. "I have little to offer in return," Sarah admitted. "You learn," he replied, as if this were payment enough. The rain had slackened to a gentle patter. Running Wolf gathered his tools and moved toward the door. "Rest. Morning comes early. Will you?" Sarah hesitated, unsure what she was asking. "Will you come back?" He paused at the threshold. "Yes. Many things to teach if you want to live." Then he was gone, melting into the misty twilight as silently as he'd arrived. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching the spot where he'd disappeared. The encounter left her unbalanced, questioning everything she'd been taught about the Apache. Savages didn't tend wounded hands with gentle care. Enemies didn't repair roofs in thunderstorms. That night, as she lay on her cot listening to the diminishing rain, Sarah took inventory of her situation. She was alone in the wilderness with winter approaching. Her survival skills were improving but insufficient. A man from a feared tribe had offered help, seeming to expect nothing in return except perhaps her willingness to learn. She had 2 choices: trust him or die trying to make it alone. Morning brought clear skies and a decision. Sarah rose early, built up her fire, and set water to boil. She used some of her precious coffee to brew a strong pot, then carried a cup outside where she suspected Running Wolf would appear. She didn't have to wait long. He emerged from the tree line carrying an armful of straight branches and what looked like a bundle of pine resin. He stopped, clearly surprised to see her waiting. Sarah held out the cup. "Good morning." After a moment's hesitation, Running Wolf shifted his load to one arm and accepted the coffee with the other. He inhaled the steam, a flicker of appreciation crossing his face. "Good morning, Sarah Thornton," he replied, the formal use of her full name oddly touching. As they stood in the clear dawn light, cup passed between them, Sarah felt something shift. In the ground beneath her feet, not literally but fundamentally. The woman who had been deemed worthless was forming an alliance that defied every boundary of her former world. Days fell into a pattern. Running Wolf would appear at dawn, materializing from the forest edge as if conjured by the first rays of sunlight. Sarah would have coffee waiting, a luxury she rationed carefully, saving it for these morning meetings. They would drink in companionable silence before he would indicate the day's task with his economical speech. Roof today, or water path needs steps, or simply hunting. Sarah learned more in those weeks than in all her previous years combined. Running Wolf taught without condescension, demonstrating techniques with patient hands before watching her attempts with an unreadable expression. When she failed, and she often did at first, he would simply show her again, occasionally adjusting her grip or stance with brief, impersonal touches. "Hold knife like this," he would say, positioning her fingers. "Let weight do work." He brought her a hand-drawn map on a piece of tanned deerskin, the charcoal lines depicting the surrounding terrain with remarkable accuracy. Together they sat on her doorstep as he pointed out features. "Creek follows this path. Good fishing here." His finger traced a bend in the water. "These hills have roots, good for medicine. This area," he indicated with a circular motion, "stay away. Cougar den." "And Apache land?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Running Wolf's expression remained neutral. "All is Apache land, but my people's camp here." He indicated an area beyond a distinctive rock formation. "Safe for you to hear only." He drew an invisible boundary with his finger. "Beyond, other Apache not know you. Not safe." Sarah studied the map, committing it to memory. "Why do you trust me with this?" Running Wolf considered her question. "You not soldier, not take land. Just try to live." After a pause, he added, "Map helps you not get lost, not wander where dangerous." For all his help, he remained largely enigmatic. He never stayed past midday, disappearing back into the forest with a nod or brief word. Sarah found herself watching the tree line in the afternoons, aware of a strange emptiness when he was gone. Her trips to town became less frequent as she grew more self-sufficient. Running Wolf taught her to set snares for rabbits, to identify edible plants, to preserve meat by smoking it over a carefully tended fire. Each skill represented another day she could survive without venturing into the settlement where sideways glances and whispers still followed her. On one such necessary trip, Sarah encountered Margaret Thornton outside the general store. Her former mother-in-law's eyes widened in surprise before narrowing with assessment. "You're still here," Margaret said, her tone suggesting this defied natural law. Sarah nodded politely. "I am. Alone out there? With winter coming. I manage." Margaret sniffed, taking in Sarah's altered appearance, the sun-darkened skin, the calloused hands, the practical way she'd begun wearing her hair in a single braid. "You look changed." "I am changed," Sarah replied simply. "There's talk," Margaret said, lowering her voice, "about smoke from your chimney before dawn, about a man seen near your property." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "People always talk. They say it's an Apache." Margaret's voice held equal parts fear and accusation. "Do they?" Sarah adjusted her basket on her arm. "I should finish my shopping before dark." "Sarah." Margaret's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "If you're consorting with savages, you're putting the whole settlement at risk. Gerald says." "Mrs. Thornton," Sarah interrupted, gently but firmly removing the woman's hand. "I'm no longer your concern, nor Mr. Thornton's. You made that quite clear." She left Margaret standing open-mouthed and completed her purchases with deliberate calm, though her heart raced beneath her composure. That evening, she related the encounter to Running Wolf as they worked together stretching a deerskin he'd brought. "Town people afraid," he observed, hands never pausing in their rhythmic scraping. They've always feared what they don't understand, Sarah replied. I did too once. Running Wolf glanced at her. Not afraid now? Sarah considered the question as she worked the skin's edge. I'm afraid of many things. Starvation, winter, illness. She met his eyes. But not you. Something flickered in his expression, approval, perhaps. He reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper. For you. To learn. Sarah wiped her hands before accepting it. Inside were careful charcoal drawings of Apache words with English translations beneath. Basic terms: water, food, fire, danger, friend. You're teaching me your language? She asked, surprised. He nodded. You teach me better English. I teach you Apache words. Fair trade. That evening, after Running Wolf had departed, Sarah practiced the strange syllables aloud, rolling them on her tongue until they began to feel natural. When darkness fell, she lit her lamp and examined the map he'd given her, tracing the paths with her finger, memorizing the landmarks. In the flickering lamplight, Sarah realized how much her world had expanded. 2 months ago, she'd been cast out, deemed worthless without a husband or children. Now she was learning to hunt, to identify medicinal plants, even to speak words from a language she'd been taught to fear. She was no longer merely surviving. She was building something new from the ruins of her old life. The next morning, when Running Wolf emerged from the forest, Sarah greeted him with his own language. Dagati, she said carefully. Good morning. For the first time, she saw him smile, a brief upward curve of lips that transformed his solemn face. Dagati, Sarah, he replied, accepting the coffee cup she offered. Your words are good. The seasons turned. Summer heat gave way to autumn's crisp mornings. Sarah's garden yielded a modest harvest, enough beans and corn to supplement her expanding skills at hunting and gathering. The cabin transformed under their joint efforts. Proper roof, a sturdy door, chinked walls that kept out the wind, even a small covered porch where they often sat during their morning ritual. I need to go to town, Sarah announced one such morning. Winter supplies. Running Wolf nodded. Snow comes soon. 2 weeks, maybe less. Will you? Sarah hesitated. Will you still come when the snow is deep? He considered her question with his usual thoroughness. If path is safe. Some days not possible. The prospect of days without his company settled uneasily in her chest. She'd grown accustomed to their quiet partnership, the simple rhythm of work shared without demands or expectations. I should go today then, she decided, while the weather holds. Running Wolf stood. Good. Hunting yesterday. Trade meat for what you need. He disappeared briefly into the forest, returning with 2 dressed rabbits and a small turkey, more than she'd need for herself. The implied suggestion warmed her. He was looking after her needs, anticipating the exchanges that would serve her best. Sarah wrapped the meat carefully and set out for town, absently touching the small Apache amulet Running Wolf had given her, now hidden beneath her collar. She'd secured it there after Margaret's confrontation, unwilling to invite more gossip but unwilling to part with it. Copper Springs had changed little, though Sarah now viewed it through different eyes. The neat rows of buildings, once representing civilization's comfort, now seemed confining. The sideways glances from women who had once taken tea in her parlor no longer stung. Their world had become smaller than hers. At the general store, she traded her meat for coffee, flour, and salt staples that would extend her winter provisions. Mr. Wilson accepted the game with a nod, his curiosity evident but restrained. Quite the huntress you've become, Mrs. Thornton. Sarah smiled noncommittally. Necessity teaches quickly. Indeed. He hesitated, then added, There's someone asking after you. Your sister-in-law, Eliza. Thomas's younger sister. Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face. Eliza had been away at school in Boston during Sarah's marriage, returning only for Thomas's funeral before disappearing east again. She's here? In Copper Springs. Mr. Wilson nodded toward the small hotel across the street. Arrived yesterday. said it was family business. Sarah gathered her purchases, mind racing. Unlike Margaret, Eliza had shown her genuine kindness during their brief acquaintance. Still, she represented the family that had discarded Sarah so easily. The hotel lobby was empty save for a slender woman gazing out the window, her traveling costume wrinkled from long wear. "Eliza!" The woman turned, her face, so like Thomas's in its bone structure, lighting with recognition. "Sarah, thank goodness. I wasn't sure you'd still be here." They embraced awkwardly, the formality of their connection making the gesture stilted. "Mother wrote that you'd taken up residence at the old Perkins cabin," Eliza said. "I worried about you out there alone." Sarah gestured to a small sitting area. "I've managed quite well, actually." They settled into uncomfortable chairs, examining each other with careful eyes. "You look healthy," Eliza offered. "Mother described you as half-wild, but you seem perfectly composed to me." Sarah couldn't help her smile. "Your mother finds my independence concerning." "Mother finds everything concerning," Eliza replied with unexpected frankness. "Especially things she can't control." A silence stretched between them before Eliza reached into her handbag. "I came across something while sorting Father's papers. He passed last month, heart failure." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, though the news affected her little. Gerald Thornton had never been more than distantly civil to her. "It was peaceful," Eliza said dismissively. "But among his effects I found this." She withdrew a worn Bible. "It belonged to your father, I believe. Mother wanted it burned with the rest of your things, but I kept it." Sarah accepted the book with trembling hands. Her father's Bible, the family record of births, deaths, and marriages spanning generations. She'd thought it lost forever. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." Eliza nodded, then leaned forward. "Sarah, there's something else. Something Mother said about you after you left. About your background." Sarah tensed. "What about it?" "She claimed your mother wasn't who you thought she was. That your father's first wife, your real mother, was not entirely white." The words hung between them. Sarah opened the Bible with unsteady fingers, turning to the family record pages. There, in faded ink, was the evidence her father's first marriage to Grace Whitefeather, who died in childbirth. Below, the record of Sarah's birth, followed by her father's second marriage to Constance Miller, the woman Sarah had always known as Mother. "Cherokee," Eliza said quietly. "Your mother was Cherokee. Father discovered it when investigating your family before Thomas's proposal. Mother was furious, said it explained your wild tendencies." Sarah stared at the name, written in her father's careful hand. Grace Whitefeather, a secret kept from her entire life. They knew. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "When they arranged the marriage?" Eliza nodded. "Father thought it immaterial since you were raised properly. Mother never agreed, but the business connection with your stepfather was too valuable to reject." The revelation crashed through Sarah's understanding of herself, rearranging pieces that had never quite fit. Her stepmother's constant corrections, the odd looks from Thomas's family, her inexplicable comfort in the wilderness that had terrified her at first. "Does anyone else know?" she asked. "Not in town, I don't think," Eliza replied. "Mother would never allow such gossip. But I thought you should know the truth." She hesitated. "It changes nothing about who you are, Sarah. But it changed everything." Sarah clutched the Bible to her chest, a strange lightness spreading through her despite the shock. "Thank you for telling me, Eliza, and for saving this." Sarah returned to the cabin with her father's Bible pressed against her heart. Her world simultaneously expanded and contracted by its revelations. The familiar path through the woods felt different under her feet, as if the land recognized something in her blood that she was only now discovering. Running Wolf was gone when she arrived, but evidence of his care remained. The woodpile had been replenished, a freshly killed deer hung from the skinning rack he'd built, and the cabin door, previously hanging slightly crooked despite their best efforts, had been rehung to perfection. That evening, Sarah sat by lamplight, tracing her finger over her true mother's name. Grace Whitefeather, Cherokee, a woman whose blood ran in her veins but whose face she would never know. She wondered what else had been hidden from her, what natural affinities had been suppressed, what instincts dismissed as improper. Dawn brought Running Wolf and their usual ritual, but Sarah's mind was too full for comfortable silence. "My mother was Cherokee," she said as they sat with steaming cups on the porch steps. "I just learned yesterday. She died when I was born." Running Wolf's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "This surprises you. I never knew. They kept it from me. I was raised by my stepmother who made me feel wrong somehow. Always correcting, always finding fault." He considered this. "She feared the wild in you." "Yes," Sarah breathed, struck by the perfect simplicity of his assessment. "Exactly that." Running Wolf nodded. "Makes sense now. How you learn fast. How you listen to land." "Does it make a difference?" Sarah asked, uncertain what answer she hoped for. "To me," he shook his head. "You same person today as yesterday. But for you," he gestured to the wilderness around them. "Maybe explains why you belong here when others would die." Belong. The word settled in her chest like a warm stone. She had never belonged in the Thornton house with its rigid rules and cold judgments. Perhaps she had never belonged in town at all. "Cherokee and Apache not same," Running Wolf added. "Different people, different ways, but both know how to live with land, not against it." Sarah clutched the Bible in her lap. "I wish I'd known her. My real mother." "She is in you," he said simply. "In how your hands work, in how you see." The matter-of-factness of his response comforted her more than any elaborate condolence. Running Wolf dealt in practicalities, in observable truths. That day he helped her finish preparing the deer, showing her how to use every part: meat for food, hide for clothing, sinew for thread, bones for tools. As they worked side by side, Sarah found herself studying his hands, the precise economy of his movements, the respect with which he treated the animal that had given its life for their sustenance. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked when the work was done, the question escaping before she could consider its propriety. Running Wolf paused, clearly surprised by the invitation. In all these months, he had never entered her cabin except during that first storm and briefly thereafter to help with repairs. Their relationship existed in daylight, in the shared work of survival. "I would like that," he said finally. Sarah busied herself preparing a simple stew, acutely aware of his presence as he sat at her small table, his large frame making the cabin seem suddenly smaller. She'd learned to cook with the native plants he'd introduced her to: sumac berries for tang, wild onions, juniper when she wanted a pine-like flavor. "Smells good," he offered, watching her work. "My stepmother would be horrified," Sarah replied with a small smile. She believed proper ladies should never enjoy cooking, merely supervise it adequately. "Strange belief," Running Wolf said. "How can you make good food if you don't love making it?" Sarah ladled the stew into bowls, one ceramic, one wooden, and joined him at the table. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Sarah gathered her courage. "You've taught me so much about your life, but I know almost nothing about you. Running Wolf set down his spoon, considering her request. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to tell me." He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, measured. "I was born near Mexico border. Different Apache band from here. When I was boy, missionary school took me. Taught English, numbers, Bible." His mouth tightened briefly. 8 years there. When I returned, I was stranger to my people." "That must have been difficult," Sarah said softly. He nodded once. "Had to learn Apache ways again, but knew English ways too. Became translator sometimes, between worlds. Met my wife at gathering of bands. She was weaver, best hands for baskets." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Like one I left for you." Sarah's heart constricted. The willow basket was hers? "Yes, only thing I kept." He paused. "Had son. Strong boy, 3 summers old when soldiers came." His eyes grew distant, seeing something beyond the cabin walls. Sarah wanted to reach for his hand but restrained herself. We lived peaceful, grew corn, beans, traded with some settlers. But new commander at fort didn't want Apache nearby. Said we raided cattle, not true. One morning soldiers came. I was hunting. Came back to. He stopped, the words catching. Everyone gone. Hogan's burning. Running Wolf, I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered. Many died that day. My wife, my son, my brother's family. His jaw tightened. Some Apache wanted war after. Wanted all white people dead. Couldn't. More death doesn't bring them back. So you came here? Away from the memories? He nodded. Followed elk north. Found quiet place. Built small shelter. Lived alone until I saw woman trying to fix roof in rain. The faintest smile touched his lips. Doing very bad job. Winter announced itself with a sudden drop in temperature. Sarah woke one morning to find frost etching delicate patterns on her window and a thin crust of ice rimming her water barrel. Running Wolf arrived with an armload of extra firewood and news that made her stomach tighten. Storm coming. Big snow. He glanced at her woodpile. Not enough. They spent the day felling dead trees and dragging branches back to the cabin. Sarah's muscles burned from the effort, but she matched Running Wolf's pace without complaint. By dusk, a woodpile taller than she stood beside the cabin, enough to last through several cold weeks. Should get more when weather clears, Running Wolf said, studying the darkening sky. First storm hardest to judge. Will you make it back to your shelter before it hits? Sarah asked, eyeing the heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. He shook his head. Too far now. We'll make camp nearby. You could stay here, she offered, the words emerging before she could reconsider them. There's the porch, at least. More shelter than the forest. Running Wolf seemed to weigh invisible factors. Propriety, practicality, unspoken boundaries. Yes, he said finally. Porch good. Thank you. The storm arrived in the night. Sarah woke to the soft shushing of heavy snow and the moan of wind searching for entry around her windows. By morning, the world had transformed. Drifts piled against the cabin walls, trees bowed under white burdens, and the familiar landscape had vanished beneath a blanket of pristine white. Running Wolf had already cleared a path from her door to the woodpile when she emerged, wrapped in her warmest shawl. He nodded in greeting, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Beautiful, Sarah said, gazing at the transformed valley. Beautiful but dangerous, he corrected. Hard to hunt. Hard to travel. Their usual morning ritual expanded to include breakfast, cornmeal porridge sweetened with the last of Sarah's honey. Running Wolf produced a packet of tea made from pine needles and mint, rich with vitamin C that he explained would keep winter sickness at bay. Teach me to read? He asked as they lingered over the warm drinks. Books helpful in long winter. Sarah had noticed him eyeing her small collection, mostly religious texts and one battered volume of Shakespeare left from her old life. The request surprised and pleased her. Of course, she agreed. We can start. With the Bible if you like. The stories are fairly simple. He nodded. Bible good. Know some already from mission school. Different when someone kind teaches. The comment, delivered without self-pity, squeezed Sarah's heart. How many cruelties had been inflicted under the guise of education? She resolved to be a patient teacher. They settled into a routine as the snow continued intermittently over the following days. Mornings were for essential tasks, clearing paths, bringing in wood, checking snares set close to the cabin. Afternoons found them by the fire, Sarah guiding Running Wolf through Bible passages, his finger following the words as he sounded them out. His intelligence was evident in how quickly he progressed, moving from labored reading to growing fluency within weeks. Sarah found herself enjoying the role of teacher, explaining context and answering questions that revealed a deeply thoughtful mind. Why this God let people suffer? He asked one afternoon, after reading the book of Job. Seems cruel test. Many ask the same question, Sarah replied. I think the story is about faith through hardship, though I've had my own doubts. Running Wolf considered this. Apache believe Creator gives each person path to walk. Good or bad come from choices, not tests from sky. These theological discussions became Sarah's favorite part of their lessons. Running Wolf brought perspectives untainted by church doctrine, asking questions that clergymen would consider heretical but that Sarah had often wondered herself. In exchange, Running Wolf taught Sarah more Apache words and phrases in the evenings. They sat on opposite sides of her small table, a candle between them casting warm light on a deerskin where he drew symbols and words. "You're speaking good," he told her as she carefully repeated phrases. "Accent still funny, but words right." Sarah laughed. "Your English improves faster than my Apache. Different when you hear language as child," he explained. "Brain remembers better." As winter deepened, they began another project together. Sarah had saved scraps of fabric from her old dresses, too worn for wearing but too valuable to discard. One evening, she began piecing them into a simple quilt pattern. Running Wolf watched with interest. "Cold nights coming. Good thinking." "It won't be very pretty," Sarah admitted, "but it will be warm." The next day, he arrived with a bundle of rabbit furs, perfectly tanned to butter softness. "For inside," he explained, "between fabric, warmer than cotton." Together they designed a quilt unlike any that would be recognized in Boston parlors or frontier settlements. Sarah's fabric pieces formed the outer shell, but Running Wolf added elements from his tradition, a border pattern of triangular designs representing mountains, small shells he'd carried from his homeland to jingle softly when moved, bringing good dreams. As they worked, their hands occasionally brushed. Each time, Sarah felt a jolt of awareness, a current that seemed to linger in her fingertips. She began to notice other things, the graceful strength in his wrists as he worked with needle and sinew, the way lamplight caught copper highlights in his black hair, the rare but transformative quality of his smile. One evening as they bent over their handiwork, Running Wolf paused, looking up to find Sarah watching him. Something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. For a breathless moment, the air seemed charged with possibility. Then he carefully set down his needle. "Getting late. Should check my snares before dark." He was gone before Sarah could respond, leaving her with the half-finished quilt and a confusion of feelings she had no name for. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind, wondering if Running Wolf was safe in his shelter, wondering at the strange ache that had settled beneath her breastbone. The day after their charged moment over the quilt, Running Wolf didn't come at dawn. Sarah tried to quell her disappointment as morning stretched toward noon with no sign of him. Perhaps the weather had made travel difficult, or game had led him farther afield. She busied herself with indoor tasks, trying not to glance repeatedly at the tree line. When he finally appeared in late afternoon, Sarah's relief embarrassed her with its intensity. He carried something wrapped in hide, his expression more solemn than usual. "Thought you weren't coming," she said, trying to keep her tone light as she invited him in from the cold. "Went far," he explained. "To trading place." Sarah raised her eyebrows in surprise. The nearest trading post was a full day's journey. Running Wolf set his bundle on the table and carefully unwrapped it. Inside lay a silver hairpin, simply crafted but beautiful, with a small turquoise stone set at its top. "For you," he said quietly. "Traded furs." Sarah stared at the gift, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. Since being cast out by the Thorntons, no one had given her anything that wasn't practical for survival. The hairpin was beautiful, yes, but its true value lay in its uselessness, a thing acquired solely for pleasure. "It's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch it hesitantly. "But I can't accept something so valuable." Running Wolf frowned slightly. "Why not?" "Because," Sarah faltered, settler customs about improper gifts between unmarried men and women suddenly seeming absurd in this context. "Because I have nothing to give you in return." His expression softened. "Not how gifts work. Give because want to, not to get back." After a pause, he added, "Silver good for spirit. Turquoise brings protection. For woman building new life alone. Seems right." Sarah picked up the hairpin, its weight solid and cool in her palm. "Will you show me how to wear it?" Running Wolf hesitated, then moved behind her as she sat at the table. With careful fingers, he gathered her braid, coiling it at the nape of her neck before sliding the pin through to secure it. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "To hold up your strength," he said softly, "as you have held up mine." Sarah reached back, fingers brushing his as she felt the arrangement. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." Something shifted between them after the gift. Running Wolf stayed later into the evenings, their conversations extending beyond practical matters into deeper territories, childhood memories, hopes that had been set aside, beliefs about the world and their places in it. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Sarah asked one night as they sat before the fire. "Living between two worlds?" Running Wolf considered. "As boy in mission school, dreamed of returning to my people, being true Apache again. Then when I returned, part of me missed certain things, books, ideas." He looked into the flames. "Now I think maybe better to take good things from both worlds. Make new way." "A third path," Sarah murmured, understanding completely. Winter deepened, bringing days of bitter cold when even Running Wolf wouldn't venture far from shelter. The isolation that had once terrified Sarah now felt peaceful, a cocoon in which something new was forming, though she couldn't yet name its shape. Then came the fever. It began with a tickle in her throat, a heaviness in her limbs that Sarah attributed to the endless cold. By evening, she could barely rise from her bed, her skin alternately burning and freezing, her thoughts scattered like leaves in a gale. Running Wolf found her delirious, the fire nearly out, the cabin grown dangerously cold. Through the haze of fever, Sarah was vaguely aware of him rebuilding the fire, of cool cloths on her forehead, of herbal teas coaxed between her cracked lips. Time lost meaning. Day blended into night and back again. Sometimes she thought her stepmother stood over her bed, scolding her for impropriety. Other times she called for her father, begging to know more about her real mother. Through it all, a steady presence remained, a cool hand, a soft voice murmuring words she couldn't understand but found comforting nonetheless. When clarity finally returned, Sarah woke to find Running Wolf asleep in her chair, his large frame somehow contained in the small space, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. On the table beside her bed sat an array of remedies: pine needle tea, a paste of herbs, a bowl of broth kept warm near the fire. "Running Wolf," she whispered, her voice a rasp. He woke instantly, years of survival making his sleep light. Relief washed over his features when he saw her clear eyes. "Fever broke," he said, moving to touch her forehead with the back of his hand. "Good. How long?" Sarah asked. 3 days. The implications struck her immediately. 3 days he had stayed, nursing her through the worst of the illness. 3 days when anyone from town might have come looking for her. 3 days when his own needs had been set aside. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said weakly. "If someone had seen you here." Running Wolf's expression hardened slightly. "Let them see. You would have died alone." The simple truth silenced her protest. He had saved her life, disregarding the danger to himself. "The others in town," she said after a moment. "They don't know you like I do." "No," he agreed. "They see only Apache. Enemy." He handed her a cup of water. "Drink. Body needs water after fever." Sarah obeyed, watching him over the rim of the cup. "And what do you see when you look at me?" she asked, the illness having stripped away her usual caution. Running Wolf met her gaze steadily. Woman with courage. Woman building life from nothing. He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Woman I think about when not here." The admission hung between them, too significant to dismiss, too fragile to examine closely. "Rest now," he said, rising. "Fever may return if you don't get strong again." Sarah caught his hand as he turned to go. "Thank you," she said, "for my life." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Your life worth saving." Worth. The word echoed in her mind as she drifted back to sleep. Worthless, they had called her. But here was a man who had risked everything to prove otherwise. Spring announced itself in whispers, the drip of melting icicles, the first tentative birdsong before dawn, patches of bare earth emerging from beneath winter's blanket. Sarah's strength returned slowly after her illness, each day bringing more color to her cheeks and steadiness to her steps. Running Wolf remained a constant presence, though he had returned to sleeping in his own shelter once she was out of danger. Their rhythm had changed, the shared intimacy of her illness, his hands cooling her fevered brow, his voice murmuring comfort in the darkness, lingered between them, acknowledged but not discussed. Each morning, Sarah secured her hair with his silver pin, aware of his eyes following the movement. As the snow receded, cabin fever drove Sarah toward town. She needed supplies, yes, but also craved human interaction beyond Running Wolf's company, much as she valued it. Going to Henderson's mill, she told him over their morning coffee. There's a county office there. I want to inquire about this land. Running Wolf looked up from the Bible he'd been reading. He could now manage most passages without assistance. What about land? I've been living here nearly a year, Sarah explained. If no one has claimed it legally, I might be able to file a homestead claim. She'd been considering this for months, a way to secure her position, to transform from squatter to landowner. Running Wolf's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture shifted. Land cannot be owned. In Apache thinking, perhaps, Sarah acknowledged, but in settler law it can. And settler law is what would protect me if someone tried to take this place. Who would take it? He asked. No one wants this far from town. Now, perhaps, but things change. Towns expand. If someone discovered value here, timber, minerals, they could force me out without legal protection. He said nothing more, but his silence carried weight as she prepared for her journey. It was their first real disagreement, and it left Sarah unsettled as she rode the borrowed mare into Henderson's mill. The settlement was larger than Copper Springs, boasting a proper courthouse and land office. Sarah tied her horse outside and straightened her best dress, the one she'd carefully preserved for necessary interactions with the outside world. With the silver hairpin catching the spring sunlight, she felt an unfamiliar confidence as she approached the clerk. I'm inquiring about a parcel of land, she explained. A cabin and surrounding acreage near Copper Springs, bordering Apache territory. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, squinted at her. That'd be in Old Man Perkins' section, wouldn't it? Out past Miller's Creek. Yes, exactly. He rummaged through a cabinet of maps and documents. Perkins died about 6 years back. No heirs came forward. He pulled out a yellow document. Land reverted to territorial holdings. Never been properly claimed since. Sarah's heart quickened. And if someone wanted to claim it now? The clerk eyed her with new interest. You? A woman alone. Is there a law against it? Sarah kept her voice steady. No law, he admitted. Unusual is all. Would need to file homestead papers, pay the fee, improve the land. He studied her. You already living out there? Nearly a year. He whistled softly. Most men don't last that long in those parts. Apache trouble? None, Sarah said firmly. I've had no difficulties. Something in her tone discouraged further questions. The clerk produced the necessary papers, explaining the process of fees, requirements for improving the land, the 5-year residency needed before the claim became permanent. 160 acres, he said, marking boundaries on a map. That's standard allotment. Includes the cabin and good piece of valley. Sarah signed where indicated, paid the filing fee from her carefully saved funds, and left with a copy of the deed, the first thing she had truly owned since being cast out by the Thorntons. Running Wolf was waiting when she returned, though he usually would have departed by that hour. His face revealed nothing as she dismounted. How was town? He asked. Productive. Sarah hesitated, then handed him the deed. I filed a claim. The land is legally mine now, or will be, after 5 years of living here. He studied the paper, though she knew he couldn't read all the legal terminology. When he looked up, His eyes held an emotion she couldn't interpret. This paper says you own Perkins Valley now? Yes, the cabin and surrounding land. Land my people hunted for generations before any cabin. His voice remained level, but carried an edge she'd never heard before. Running Wolf, I'm not claiming ownership of all Apache territory, Sarah said, frustrated. Just this small piece where I've built a life. Today small piece, tomorrow more. He handed the deed back. This how it always begins. The accusation stung. What would you have me do? Remain vulnerable to anyone who decides they want this place. I'm a woman alone in the world. I need security. Security? He repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. My people had security before papers claiming land. I'm not your enemy, Sarah said softly. Running Wolf's expression softened slightly. No, but you think like them now. Land something to possess, not something that holds us all. Perhaps there's a middle path, Sarah suggested, echoing his own words from months before. This paper protects me from other settlers. It doesn't change how I live with the land, how I respect it. He considered this, visibly wrestling with concepts fundamentally opposed to his worldview. What does paper say about Apache crossing this land? Hunting here as always done. Sarah hadn't considered this aspect. It doesn't mention it at all. The boundaries are marked, but nothing about restricting access. So you decide now? Who comes? Who goes? The question laid bare the power imbalance created by the deed. Sarah felt suddenly ashamed. This man had saved her life multiple times, taught her to survive, shared his knowledge freely, and now she stood before him with a document that claimed authority over land his ancestors had walked for centuries. No, she said firmly. I would never restrict you or your people from this land. Never. Running Wolf studied her face, searching for truth. Easy to say now. Hard promise to keep when other settlers come. Then let me make it more than a promise. Sarah took a deep breath. What if the deed were in both our names? Is that even possible? The idea formed as she spoke it, radical and perhaps impossible, but feeling right. Surprise flickered across his features. Apache cannot own land in white law. Perhaps not as Apache, but as my husband. The word hung between them, stunning them both with its implications. Running Wolf's expression stilled completely. For several heartbeats, neither spoke. This is not proper proposal, he finally said, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah felt heat rush to her face. No, I didn't mean. I was thinking practically about the land. Land holds us both, he said quietly, echoing her earlier words. Does not need paper to be true. He turned to go, then paused. Need time to think, Sarah. You also need time. As he disappeared into the forest, Sarah stood clutching the deed, understanding that she had fundamentally altered something between them. For better or worse remained to be seen. 3 days passed with no sign of Running Wolf. Sarah moved through her routines mechanically, the absence of his steady presence leaving a hollow she hadn't anticipated. Had she destroyed everything with her impulsive words? The deed lay on her table, a piece of paper that had somehow torn asunder the delicate balance they'd created. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Not Running Wolf's silent arrival, but a rider coming hard up the trail from town. She dressed quickly and stepped onto her porch to see a young boy from Copper Springs reining in a lathered horse. Mrs. Thornton? The boy, perhaps 12, looked nervous. Mr. Wilson sent me. Says you should come to town right away. What's happened? Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Fire, Apache raids, illness. Don't rightly know, ma'am. Just said to fetch you. Said it's about your property. Sarah's stomach tightened. Tell Mr. Wilson I'll come straight away. The boy galloped back toward town while Sarah quickly gathered what she might need. She'd made the trip often enough now that it took little preparation, though she tucked the precious deed into her pocket before saddling the mare she'd purchased with her small earnings from town. Copper Springs appeared unchanged as she rode in, though she noted a fine carriage outside the hotel that hadn't been there before, unusual for the small settlement. Mr. Wilson waved her into the general store as soon as she appeared. His normally impassive face creased with concern. "Sarah, thank goodness," he said, abandoning formality in his urgency. "Been some developments you should know about." "What's happened?" He glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Gerald Thornton's eldest boy arrived yesterday, Thomas's brother James. He's got papers, lawyers with him from Tucson. They're claiming rights to your land." "My land?" Sarah's hand went instinctively to the deed in her pocket. "On what grounds?" "They're saying the property should have been part of Thomas's estate. That as his widow, you had no right to claim it independently." Wilson's expression darkened. "There's more. Prospectors found copper deposits in the hills just beyond your valley. Not a major strike, but enough to make the land suddenly valuable." The pieces clicked into place. "So now they want what they threw away." "Essentially." Wilson nodded. "They're at the hotel now, meeting with Judge Parker. Thought you should know before they came looking for you." Sarah's mind raced. "But I have the deed. The land was unclaimed when I filed. And that may hold. But James has influence, Sarah. Money for lawyers. They'll argue you had no right to file as a married woman." "A widow," she corrected sharply. "In their telling, a widow still under family protection who abandoned their care." Wilson sighed. "It's not right, but money talks with Judge Parker." Sarah straightened her spine. "Then I should speak with him before they poison the well completely." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." She was halfway to the door when he called. "After her." "Sarah? The rumors about an Apache scene near your property. James is using that too, claiming you've endangered the settlement by consorting with hostiles." A cold anger settled in Sarah's chest. "Hostiles? I faced more threat from the Thornton family than any Apache." The hotel lobby fell silent as Sarah entered, several townspeople staring openly at her transformed appearance, the buckskin-trimmed clothing, the silver pin in her hair, the confident stride that had replaced her once hesitant steps. She approached the desk clerk directly. "I understand Judge Parker is meeting with James Thornton. Please inform them that Sarah Thornton is here regarding the land dispute." The clerk scurried away, returning moments later. "They'll see you now, Mrs. Thornton. Second door on the right." 3 men occupied the hotel's small meeting room. Judge Parker, portly and pompous behind a makeshift desk. A thin man with spectacles whom Sarah assumed was the lawyer. And James Thornton, Thomas's older brother, whom she'd met only at her wedding and funeral. James had the same weak chin as Thomas, but none of his occasional charm. "Sarah." He greeted her with manufactured warmth. "You're looking rustic." "James," she acknowledged coolly. "I understand you're contesting my claim to my land." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm Edwin Morris, representing the Thornton family interests. There seems to be some confusion regarding the property known as Perkins' Cabin." "No confusion," Sarah replied, producing her deed. "I filed a legal homestead claim on unclaimed territory. The papers are in order." Judge Parker examined the document with a frown. "Filed in your name alone? As a married woman?" "As a widow," Sarah corrected, "which I have been for over a year." "Technically," James interjected, "a widow remains under the protection and guidance of her husband's family. Sarah has been unwell since Thomas's death, wandering in her grief. We've been searching for her to bring her home." The blatant lie nearly took Sarah's breath away. "You declared me worthless and cast me out with barely enough money for a month's supplies." James feigned confusion. "A misunderstanding, surely. Mother has kept your room ready all this time." Judge Parker looked uncomfortable. "These are family matters. My concern is the legal status of the claim." The lawyer produced a document from his portfolio. "We have here testimony from Margaret Thornton that Sarah left the family home in a state of mental distress following her husband's death. As such, she was in no condition to file legal claims independently." "That's absurd," Sarah protested. "I've built a successful homestead from nothing. My mental faculties are perfectly sound." "Then perhaps you can explain," James said silkily. Why multiple witnesses report seeing an Apache man visiting your property regularly. Some might question the judgment of a woman who invites such interactions. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame but from fury. My associations are my own concern, Mr. Thornton. They have no bearing on the legality of my claim. Judge Parker, the lawyer interjected, we also have this. He produced another document. A letter from Thomas Thornton to his father, dated 3 months before his death, expressing his intention to claim the Perkins property for timber harvesting. As his widow, Sarah would have inherited his intention but not the right to file independently. Sarah's heart sank. Whether the letter was genuine or fabricated, it created a complication she hadn't anticipated. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, recent mineral surveys suggest valuable deposits in the area. The territory has interest in ensuring such resources are properly developed, not left idle by a single woman with questionable connections. Judge Parker looked troubled. These are serious considerations, Mrs. Thornton. I'll need to review all documents and testimonies before making a determination. James smiled, victory already in his eyes. Of course, we're prepared to be generous. Sarah can retain usage of the cabin itself under proper supervision, while the surrounding acreage is developed appropriately. A messenger knocked and entered, handing Judge Parker a note. As he read it, his eyebrows rose. It seems, the judge said slowly, that we have another interested party. Thomas Thornton's sister, Eliza, has just arrived from Boston and requests to join our discussion. He looked at Sarah. She claims to have documents relevant to your situation. Eliza Thornton swept into the room like a cool eastern breeze, her traveling clothes dusty but fashionable, her expression composed but determined. Sarah had never been so glad to see another person. Judge Parker, Eliza nodded formally, then turned. James, I see you wasted no time once father was buried. James's smile tightened. Eliza, this is a family matter. Precisely why I'm here. She turned to Sarah with genuine warmth. I came as soon as I received word of James's plans. The lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Thornton, we're discussing legal matters regarding property claims. How fortunate that I brought these, then. Eliza opened her satchel and removed a leather portfolio. Father's personal correspondence with Thomas, including several letters explicitly stating that Thomas had no claim to the Perkins land. James's face flushed dark red. That's impossible. Also, Eliza continued as if he hadn't spoken. Father's will, which specifically excludes you, James, from any further family business decisions due to, and I quote, persistent mismanagement and self-dealing. She turned to the judge. You'll find everything properly notarized. Judge Parker examined the documents with growing discomfort. These appear to contradict your claims, Mr. Thornton. James slammed his fist on the table. This is absurd. Father was ill, not in his right mind. Father was perfectly lucid, Eliza interrupted coldly. Unlike mother, he recognized your schemes for what they were. The lawyer, sensing the shift in power, began gathering his papers. Perhaps we should adjourn to review these new materials. One more thing, Eliza added, producing another document. A bank draft. Thomas emptied the family accounts before his death, money that should have gone to Sarah as his widow. Mother and James concealed this fact, leaving Sarah destitute while they kept her rightful funds. A stunned silence filled the room. Sarah stared at the bank draft, a substantial sum that would have spared her months of desperate struggle. Judge Parker cleared his throat. These are serious allegations, Miss Thornton. Not allegations. Facts. Eliza met her brother's furious gaze without flinching. James has systematically looted the family business. The copper discovery was his last chance to cover his embezzlement before the creditors closed in. You treacherous little... James lunged toward his sister, only to be restrained by the lawyer. That's enough. Judge Parker stood. Mr. Thornton, control yourself or I'll have you removed. He turned to Sarah. Mrs. Thornton, in light of this new evidence, I'm inclined to recognize your claim as valid. However, there will need to be a formal hearing. Sarah nodded, relief washing through her. Thank you, Your Honor. James wrenched free of the lawyer's grip. This isn't over. That land belongs to the Thornton family, not some Apache-loving widow. James, Eliza said sharply, you embarrass yourself. He stormed from the room, the lawyer hurrying after him with apologies trailing in his wake. Judge Parker gathered the documents with a sigh. The hearing will be next month in Tucson. Until then, Mrs. Thornton, your claim stands. He nodded to both women before departing. Alone with Eliza, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. How did you know to come? I've been watching James since father died, Eliza explained. When he suddenly took interest in your land, I knew something was amiss. She smiled wryly. Besides, I owed you for how my family treated you. You owe me nothing, Sarah protested. You've already done more than I could have hoped. Perhaps. Eliza hesitated. The rumors about an Apache man, are they true? Sarah stiffened. Does it matter? Not to me, Eliza assured her. But to others, yes. James won't surrender easily. He'll use anything to discredit you, including unconventional associations. Sarah considered denying everything, then rejected the impulse. His name is Running Wolf. He taught me to survive when your family left me to die. Whatever exists between us is none of James's concern. Eliza studied her thoughtfully. You've changed, Sarah. Grown stronger. Necessity does that. Yes, I suppose it does. Eliza gathered her belongings. I must return to Boston soon, but I've instructed my lawyer to represent you at the hearing. In the meantime, be careful. James doesn't accept defeat gracefully. Sarah returned to her cabin that evening, thoughts churning with the day's revelations. The money Thomas had hidden, the copper deposits making her land suddenly valuable, James's determination to seize what she'd built. It was almost too much to absorb. Most troubling was Running Wolf's continued absence. She needed to tell him about these developments, to warn him that her land might become the focus of unwanted attention. But the forest remained silent, no sign of his familiar figure at dawn. A week passed. Sarah divided her time between strengthening her homestead and preparing documents for the upcoming hearing. She found herself talking aloud sometimes, imagining conversations with Running Wolf, explaining her position, defending her choice to claim the land legally. It was the only way, she told the empty cabin, the only protection available to me. On the 8th day, Sarah woke to the distant sound of multiple horses approaching. Moving to her window, she saw a group of riders coming up the trail from town. James Thornton at the lead, the sheriff beside him, and 3 rough-looking men she didn't recognize following behind. Sarah's hands trembled as she dressed quickly, securing her hair with Running Wolf's silver pin for courage. She checked that the deed and Eliza's documents were safely hidden beneath a loose floorboard, then took a deep breath and stepped onto her porch. The riders pulled up in her yard, dust settling around them in the morning light. James dismounted with a triumphant smile that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Mrs. Thornton, Sheriff Miller nodded uncomfortably. Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. What's the meaning of this, Sheriff? Sarah kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. James stepped forward. We've come to escort you back to town, Sarah. For your own protection. I need no protection, she replied coldly. The judge confirmed my claim is valid pending the hearing. The claim, perhaps, James conceded with mock sympathy. But new concerns have arisen about your situation here. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. Mrs. Thornton, we've received reports of regular Apache presence on this property. As sheriff, I'm obligated to investigate any potential threat to settlers. The only threat I see is standing in my yard, Sarah replied. One of the unknown men spat tobacco juice near her feet. Told you, Thornton. Gone native, this one has. Probably sharing more than conversation with her savage. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. I suggest you leave. You're trespassing on my property. Actually, James smiled. As your late husband's brother and family representative, I have every right to be concerned about your welfare. The judge may have postponed his decision, but he granted me temporary guardianship until the hearing. He produced a paper with an official seal. Sarah's blood ran cold. That's impossible. Judge Parker is a reasonable man, James said smoothly. When presented with concerns about a woman living alone in Apache territory, possibly under undue influence, well, he saw the wisdom of family intervention. Sheriff Miller looked deeply uncomfortable. It's just until the hearing, Mrs. Thornton. For your safety. And if I refuse? Sarah's hand moved to the door frame, where she knew Running Wolf's knife was hidden. Then I'm authorized to remove you by force, the sheriff admitted reluctantly. Please don't make this difficult. Movement at the forest edge caught Sarah's attention. Her heart leapt, then froze. Running Wolf stood at the tree line, watching the confrontation. His face impassive but his body tense as a drawn bow. James followed her gaze, his expression hardening when he spotted the Apache. Well, it seems the rumors were true after all. He turned to his men. Gentlemen, it appears we have an intruder. The three rough men dismounted, hands moving to their weapons. Sheriff Miller stepped between them, clearly alarmed by the escalating situation. Now hold on, he protested. There's been no trouble with the Apache in these parts for years. Until this one started visiting a white woman, James countered. Who knows what information he's gathered about our defenses, our routines. Perhaps planning a raid even now. Sarah's fear crystallized into rage. You know nothing about him or me. This is my land, and he is here by my invitation. Running Wolf stepped forward into the clearing, his hands empty, his posture deliberately non-threatening. His eyes met Sarah's briefly, a silent question that she answered with a barely perceptible nod. I am Running Wolf, he said in clear, careful English that visibly startled the men. I come in peace to this place. The clearing fell silent at Running Wolf's words. James recovered first, his surprise hardening into contempt. Well, the savage speaks English. How charming. Running Wolf ignored him, addressing the sheriff directly. This woman has harmed no one, has broken no law. Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably. No one's saying she has, but there are concerns. Concerns about what? Sarah interrupted. That I've learned to survive without a man's protection? Or that I've befriended someone you fear because you don't understand him? One of James's men spat again. Befriended. That what they call it now? Running Wolf's expression remained calm, though Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders. I have taught Sarah to live on this land. Nothing more. Mr. Thornton has legal guardianship papers, the sheriff insisted, though his conviction seemed to be wavering. Papers signed under false pretenses, Sarah countered, based on lies about my mental state and fabricated threats. James stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. Enough of this. Sarah, gather your things. You're returning to town where you belong. And if I refuse? Then these men will escort you forcibly. James nodded toward his hired hands. And your Apache friend would be wise to disappear before they decide he constitutes a threat. The implied violence hung in the air. Sarah glanced at Running Wolf, saw his hand twitch toward the knife at his belt. A movement the others missed, but she had learned to read. Wait, she said quickly, making a decision. I'll go with you to town. On one condition. James raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make conditions. I need to gather my personal items and important papers, Sarah insisted. Give me 1 hour, then I'll come peacefully. The sheriff nodded before James could object. Seems reasonable. We'll wait here. James scowled but nodded curtly. 1 hour, and the Apache leaves now. I'll walk him to the boundary, Sarah said, leaving no room for argument, to ensure there's no misunderstanding. Before anyone could object, she moved to Running Wolf's side and gestured toward the forest path. After a moment's hesitation, he turned and walked beside her, both acutely aware of the men's eyes on their backs. Once they were among the trees, screened from view but not yet out of earshot, Sarah spoke rapidly in a low voice. I'm sorry. I should have told you about the copper, about James's claims. You found me at my camp yesterday. Running Wolf replied quietly. I was not there. Where were you? Speaking with my people. About you. About us. His eyes held hers. 8 days thinking about what you said. About marriage. Sarah's heart stuttered despite the crisis surrounding them. And now this happens. Bad timing. He agreed with unexpected wry humor. What will you do? I won't go with them, Sarah said firmly. That paper is based on lies. If I leave now, I'll never get my land back. Running Wolf nodded, unsurprised. Then we need plan. We. You think I leave you to face this alone? A hint of hurt crossed his face. After all we've shared? Impulsively, Sarah reached for his hand. No, but this isn't your fight. Became my fight when they threatened you. His fingers tightened around hers. These men dangerous. James Thornton worse. I know. Sarah glanced back toward the cabin. We have less than an hour. They'll expect me to emerge with my belongings. Ready to leave. Running Wolf considered this. Time enough. My sister's son watches from Ridge. Can carry message to Apache camp. Sarah blinked in surprise. Your family is nearby? Since James Thornton came to town, I knew trouble coming. He squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. Return to cabin. Pack things like you will go. When sun touches tallest pine, be ready. Ready for what? Running Wolf's eyes gleamed. For showing James Thornton that woman he called worthless has more worth than he can imagine. They parted at the forest edge, Sarah returning to the cabin while Running Wolf melted into the deeper woods. As she began gathering her essential belongings, her mind raced. Whatever Running Wolf planned, she needed her own strategy as well. Sarah packed deliberately, making a show of cooperation whenever one of James's men peered through her window. Meanwhile, she slipped her most important documents into a hidden pocket sewn into her skirt. The deed, Eliza's evidence, and a small journal where she documented her year of independence. As she worked, a plan formed. Running Wolf had connections with the Apache community, but Sarah had built relationships of her own in town. Quiet alliances formed during her months of self-sufficiency. Mr. Wilson, who'd warned her of James's arrival. Mr. Wong, who'd given her work when others wouldn't. Eliza, who'd stood against her own family to support Sarah's claim. Even Sheriff Miller seemed uncomfortable with his role in James's scheme. The difficulty would be reaching them, rallying support before James could isolate her completely. Sarah glanced out her window, checking the sun's position against the tall pine Running Wolf had indicated. Nearly time. She took a deep breath, centering herself. The woman who had arrived at this broken-down cabin a year ago would have been paralyzed by fear. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who had survived winter alone, who had learned to hunt and build, who had crossed cultural boundaries to form a partnership based on respect rather than dominance. Someone who understood her own worth. Sarah tucked Running Wolf's knife into her boot, pinned her hair with his silver gift, and stepped onto her porch where James and his men waited impatiently. I'm ready, she announced, a small bundle in her arms suggesting compliance. James smiled triumphantly, finally seeing reason. Good. Sheriff Miller, Sarah addressed the lawman directly. Before we depart, I'd like to make a formal statement that I go under protest, believing Mr. Thornton's guardianship claim to be fraudulent. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but nodded. Noted, Mrs. Thornton. Also, she continued, voice carrying clearly, I wish to register concern for my property in my absence. Any damage or theft will be a legal matter. No one's going to damage anything, James snapped. The property will be properly managed until legal ownership is determined. By whom? Sarah challenged. The men you've hired look more suited to destruction than management. Before James could respond, movement on the ridge caught everyone's attention. Several mounted figures had appeared, Apache riders watching silently from horseback, their presence an unspoken statement. James's men tensed, hands moving to weapons. The sheriff stepped forward nervously. What's the meaning of this? he demanded. My neighbors, Sarah said calmly. Observing. Threatening, you mean, James growled. This proves everything I've claimed about your associations endangering the settlement. They've made no hostile move, Sarah pointed out, unlike the men you brought to forcibly remove me from my home. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses came from the direction of town. Sarah smiled inwardly. Running Wolf wasn't the only one with connections. The message she'd asked his nephew to deliver hadn't only gone to the Apache camp. The approaching riders emerged from the tree line, Mr. Wilson from the general store, Mr. Wong from the laundry, and to Sarah's surprise, Eliza Thornton, who must have delayed her departure for Boston. Behind them came several townspeople. Sarah recognized the blacksmith, two farmers whose wives she had helped with difficult births, and the elderly schoolteacher who had quietly borrowed books from Sarah's small collection. James's face darkened as the group dismounted. What is this? Witnesses, Sarah replied simply. Eliza stepped forward, her traveling dress exchanged for practical riding clothes. James, this has gone far enough. I've sent telegrams to Father's lawyer in Tucson explaining your scheme. My scheme? James feigned innocence. I'm protecting family interests, sister dear, and apparently just in time. He gestured toward the Apache observers. Our sister-in-law has clearly lost her senses, consorting with savages, endangering the entire territory. The only danger I see, Mr. Wilson said, stepping up beside Sarah, comes from men who think they can take what a woman has built through her own sweat and determination. James sneered. Built? She's squatting in an abandoned shack. A shack she's transformed into a proper home, the schoolteacher interjected, while learning skills most men couldn't master in years. We didn't come for a debate, James snapped. I have legal guardianship. Sheriff, do your duty. Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably, looking from the townspeople to the Apache observers on the ridge. Perhaps we should postpone this until... Until what? James demanded. Until she rallies more savages? Until someone gets killed? No. She comes with us now. Running Wolf emerged from the trees, no longer alone. Beside him walked an elderly Apache man wearing a chief's regalia, and behind them several warriors, not armed for battle but clearly prepared to defend if necessary. This woman, Running Wolf said clearly, his voice carrying across the clearing, has earned the respect of my people. She has learned our ways, honored our boundaries, traded fairly. The elderly chief nodded, speaking in Apache. Running Wolf translated smoothly. Chief Nayunui says this land has seen enough bloodshed. He asks why white men fight over earth that belongs to everyone and no one. Because that's civilization, James replied contemptuously. Something you people wouldn't understand. Running Wolf's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I understand civilization quite well, Mr. Thornton. I studied 5 years at Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. I can read Emerson, quote Shakespeare, and calculate complex mathematics. A stunned silence fell over the clearing. Even Sarah stared in surprise. I also understand white man's law, Running Wolf continued. Enough to know that guardianship requires proof of incompetence. This woman, he gestured to Sarah, has survived alone in harsh conditions, built a functioning homestead, and earned the respect of 2 communities. These witnesses can testify to her competence. James's face flushed dark red. No court will take the word of an Indian over a respected businessman. Perhaps not, Eliza interjected. But they will consider the testimony of a judge's daughter. She nodded toward the schoolteacher. Miss Harrington's father sits on the Territorial Supreme Court. She's been documenting Sarah's accomplishments for months. The elderly schoolteacher smiled thinly. A most remarkable case study in female self-sufficiency, Mr. Thornton. Father will be fascinated by my observations. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. Mr. Thornton, I'm beginning to think we should reconsider this action. This is absurd. James exploded. She's one woman standing in the way of progress, of development that could benefit the entire territory. Is copper what you call progress? Sarah asked quietly. You'd tear up this valley, poison the creek that feeds 3 settlements downstream, drive away game that sustains both Apache and settler alike? Mr. Wilson stepped forward. Copper Springs has existed alongside Apache territory peacefully for years. We trade, we maintain boundaries, we respect each other's ways. What you propose would destroy that balance. Balance? James scoffed. You're siding with Indians over your own kind? We're siding with a neighbor who has earned our respect, the blacksmith rumbled. Something you might want to consider, Thornton. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could feel the tension vibrating in the air, James's fury, his men's uncertainty, the townspeople's resolve, the watchful patience of the Apache observers. One wrong move could ignite violence that would destroy everything. Sarah moved to the center of the clearing, deliberately placing herself between the opposing sides. She unpinned her hair, letting the silver pin catch the sunlight as she held it up. This pin was a gift, she said, her voice clear and steady. From a man you would call my enemy. It represents something you've never understood. James, that true worth isn't in what you own or control, but in what you build together. She turned slowly, addressing everyone present. I came here with nothing, declared worthless, cast aside. This land gave me a second chance. These people, she gestured to both the townspeople and the Apache delegation, taught me that communities survive through cooperation, not conquest. Sarah faced James directly. You want this land for copper. I want it for life, not just my life, but the lives of everyone who depends on this valley remaining unspoiled. Pretty speech, James sneered. But sentiment doesn't override legal documents. Perhaps this will, Eliza said, producing a paper from her satchel. Father's final amendment to his will, properly witnessed and notarized. It specifically prohibits mining operations on any Thornton holdings without unanimous family consent. I never consented, James protested. Exactly, Eliza smiled coldly. Neither did I. And as father's executors, our consent is required. Sheriff Miller rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Seems to me we have a proper legal dispute that needs settling by the court, not by force. I cannot in good conscience enforce these guardianship papers given the circumstances and testimony presented. You can't be serious, James sputtered. Dead serious, the sheriff replied. Mrs. Thornton stays where she is until the proper hearing. That's my decision as the law in these parts. James looked around wildly, seeing his advantage evaporating. This isn't over, he hissed at Sarah. Not by a long shot. Perhaps not, she acknowledged calmly. But today, at least, justice prevails. As James and his men mounted to leave, Running Wolf moved to Sarah's side. The townspeople and Apache delegation remained separate but watchful, an uneasy truce born of shared purpose rather than genuine understanding. You spoke well, Running Wolf said quietly. Words have power when they come from truth. So do actions, Sarah replied, looking at the diverse group that had rallied to her defense. I never thought I'd see this day. Apache and settler standing together. Running Wolf followed her gaze. Standing together not same as understanding each other. That takes more time. Time we now have, Sarah said, hope blossoming in her chest as James's party disappeared down the trail. The standoff had ended, but the gathering remained. Sarah's yard had become an unlikely meeting ground between worlds that rarely intersected peacefully. The Apache chief spoke with Running Wolf, who then approached Sheriff Miller and the townspeople, translating the old man's words about boundaries and respect. The schoolteacher took notes with undisguised fascination. Eliza found Sarah at the edge of the group. That was remarkable, she said quietly. I've never seen anything like it. Nor have I, Sarah admitted. I didn't expect so many to come. You've made an impression. Eliza nodded toward Mr. Wilson, deep in conversation with one of the Apache men. Though I suspect this alliance is fragile. Better fragile than non-existent, Sarah replied. James will be back with more legal maneuvers. Eliza's expression hardened. Yes, he will. But so will I. The family lawyer arrives from Tucson tomorrow. We need something more permanent than today's temporary victory. Sarah glanced toward Running Wolf, remembering his words about marriage. I may have a solution, though it's unconventional. Before she could elaborate, a rider galloped into the clearing. A young man from the telegraph office in Henderson's Mill. Judge Parker sent me, he announced breathlessly. There's been complaints about armed Apache near settlement land. He's riding out himself with a military escort. A ripple of alarm spread through both groups. Sheriff Miller swore under his breath. How long? He demanded. 2 hours, maybe less, the messenger replied. They were preparing to leave when I did. The Apache warriors conferred rapidly with their chief, clearly concerned about the mention of military involvement. This changes things, Eliza said, her legal mind working quickly. A judge arriving to find Apache warriors, however peaceful their intent, could interpret this as a threatening gathering. Running Wolf had joined them, his face grave. My people should leave before soldiers come. Too many bad memories. No, Sarah said suddenly. That's exactly what James wants. To drive a wedge between us again, to isolate me from support. What do you propose? Sheriff Miller asked. Parker's a fair man, but he's cautious about Apache. Any hint of trouble and he'll side with Thornton. Sarah thought quickly. We need to change the narrative. This isn't about conflict. It's about community. About building something rather than destroying it. A treaty, Eliza suggested. Something more personal, Sarah replied, an idea forming. She turned to Running Wolf. You mentioned marriage. As a way to share the land legally. His eyes widened slightly. Yes, but not like this with emergency. Not just emergency, Sarah said softly. You've been thinking about it for 8 days, you said. A small smile touched his lips. Yes, thinking much. Judge Parker can perform civil ceremonies. The schoolteacher interjected, overhearing. A legal marriage between you would certainly complicate James's claims. Running Wolf looked skeptical. White judge would marry Apache to white woman? He might, Sheriff Miller said thoughtfully, if it were presented as a matter of territorial stability, a union bridging communities, preventing potential conflict. Sarah met Running Wolf's eyes. Is this what you want? Not just for the land, but for us. He studied her face. Have wanted for many moons, but must be your choice freely made, not forced by crisis. Sarah thought of their year together, the lessons shared, the quiet companionship, the growing trust that had become something deeper. This wasn't the romantic courtship she'd once imagined, but it was something truer, built on respect and partnership rather than ownership. It is freely made, she assured him. Crisis just forced me to admit what I've felt for months. Running Wolf took her hands in his. Then I ask properly. Sarah Thornton, will you join your path with mine? Not as my possession, but as my equal. 2 streams becoming 1 river. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. The chief spoke rapidly to Running Wolf, who translated with a slight flush to his cheeks. He says marriage needs proper ceremony, proper exchange. Apache way and white way both. We have 2 hours before Judge Parker arrives, Eliza said practically. Perhaps we can arrange something that honors both traditions. What followed was unlike anything the territory had seen before. The Apache women who had been watching from a distance came forward, bringing items for a simplified version of their marriage rituals. Sarah was taken into her cabin by the chief's wife, who helped her prepare with herbs and prayers translated by Running Wolf's sister. Meanwhile, the townspeople dispatched riders to bring Judge Parker directly to the cabin rather than stopping in town where James might intercept him. Others helped prepare a feast from the combined provisions of both communities: venison from Apache hunters, bread and preserves from town kitchens. By the time Judge Parker arrived, escorted by 2 soldiers looking distinctly uncomfortable, he found not an armed confrontation but a gathering that resembled nothing so much as a peculiar wedding celebration. The judge, a portly man with shrewd eyes, took in the scene with evident surprise. Sheriff Miller, I was led to believe there was some sort of Apache incursion. A misunderstanding, Your Honor, the sheriff replied smoothly. What we have here is something quite different. Eliza stepped forward, every inch the Boston lawyer's daughter. Judge Parker, may I present Sarah Thornton, legal claimant to this homestead, and Running Wolf, her intended husband. They've requested your services to perform a civil marriage ceremony. The judge's bushy eyebrows nearly disappeared into his hairline. Marriage? I'm not sure this is appropriate, or even legal under territorial statutes. Perfectly legal, the schoolteacher interjected. I've reviewed the relevant codes extensively. There is no prohibition against interracial marriage in this territory, merely social convention. Furthermore, Eliza added, such a union would resolve certain property disputes currently pending before your court. Mr. Running Wolf is a graduate of Carlisle Indian School, fluent in English and well-versed in American legal customs. Judge Parker studied Running Wolf with new interest. Carlisle, you say? Under Captain Pratt. Yes, Your Honor, Running Wolf replied in his perfect, formal English. I completed the full course of study before returning to my people. The judge harumphed thoughtfully. And this marriage? It's of your own free will, Mrs. Thornton? Not coerced in any fashion. Sarah stepped forward, standing tall beside Running Wolf. It is, Your Honor. This man has shown me more respect and kindness than I ever knew in my previous marriage. We wish to build a life together, bridging our two worlds rather than fighting over boundaries. A murmur of approval rose from the gathered witnesses, both Apache and settler alike. Judge Parker tugged at his beard, clearly wrestling with convention and pragmatism. Well, I can't deny it would resolve several thorny legal issues. And if both parties are willing, he sighed heavily. Very well, I'll perform the ceremony. But, he added sternly, everything must be properly documented and witnessed. This needs to withstand legal scrutiny. As the judge retrieved his official ledger from his saddlebags, Running Wolf leaned close to Sarah. Still sure? He asked softly. Once done, many will never accept. Life not easy. Sarah squeezed his hand. Life hasn't been easy since the day they called me worthless. But it's been real. And with you, it's been worth living. The ceremony that followed was brief but binding. Judge Parker, visibly uncomfortable but committed to his duty, led them through the civil vows while the Apache chief offered blessings in his own language. When Sarah and Running Wolf exchanged simple silver bands, hastily contributed by the blacksmith, two traditions merged into something new and unprecedented. 1 year later. The cabin was a cabin no longer. Through seasons of patient work, it had evolved into a proper home, sturdy walls faced with local stone, a roof that never leaked, wide windows that caught the morning light, a covered porch wrapped around two sides, lined with chairs and benches where visitors from both communities could sit and share news. Behind the house stretched a thriving garden, rows of corn and beans interspersed with medicinal plants both European and native. A small orchard of apple and plum saplings promised future harvests. Beyond that, a workshop where Running Wolf created furniture and tools that had earned a reputation throughout the territory for their beauty and durability. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching as her husband demonstrated a woodworking technique to two young men, one Apache, one the blacksmith's son from town. The easy way they worked together, asking questions, sharing observations, would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. She rested her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child within shift and stretch. 7 months along now, the baby kicked with a strength that made Running Wolf laugh when he felt it beneath his palm at night. Your mother's spirit, he would say. Strong woman making strong child. The copper that had nearly cost them everything remained undisturbed. James Thornton had persisted with his legal challenges until the Territorial Supreme Court, with Judge Harrington presiding, thanks to his daughter's influence, had ruled definitively in Sarah and Running Wolf's favor. The marriage contract, properly executed and witnessed, had proven the final obstacle James couldn't overcome. He'd left the territory shortly after, rumors suggesting he'd fled to California ahead of mounting debts. Margaret Thornton had retreated to Boston to live with distant relatives, unable to face the scandal of her daughter-in-law married to an Apache. Only Eliza maintained contact, her quarterly letters filled with news of Eastern society and genuine inquiries about their unconventional life. The sound of approaching horses drew Sarah's attention. Mr. Wilson's wagon appeared on the trail, followed by several riders, regular visitors bringing supplies from town and taking back herbs, vegetables, and handcrafted items for trade. "Sarah," Mr. Wilson called cheerfully as he pulled up before the house. "Fine day for a visit." "Always welcome," she replied, smiling as his wife descended from the wagon with a covered basket. "Brought that sourdough starter you wanted," Mrs. Wilson said, having overcome her initial reluctance about visiting the mixed household. "And some of those fabric scraps for your quilt." Inside, the women settled at the large table Running Wolf had crafted from a single fallen oak. Sarah served pine needle tea in a mixture of delicate china cups and traditional Apache pottery vessels, a visual representation of the blended life they'd created. "The trading post is flourishing," Mrs. Wilson reported. "3 new families settled near town last month. They all asked about your herbs for winter coughs." "I'll prepare extra bundles," Sarah promised. "And Running Wolf has finished another set of chairs for the schoolhouse." Their conversation flowed easily, domestic concerns mixing with community news. No mention of Sarah's unusual marriage or mixed heritage. These facts had become simply part of who she was, neither hidden nor emphasized. Later, as sunset painted the valley in amber and gold, Sarah and Running Wolf sat on their porch, watching the day's visitors depart and the evening creatures emerge. "Good day," he observed, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become natural as breathing. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "though my back aches from all that gardening." Running Wolf smiled. "Strong woman, strong complaints." She laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "Your son is restless today." "Daughter," he corrected, their ongoing friendly debate. "Already wants to run free." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the cricket songs and the distant call of a nighthawk. Sarah thought about the path that had brought them here, from her desperate arrival at a crumbling cabin to this moment of peaceful prosperity. "Do you ever think about what they said?" she asked quietly. "About me being worthless?" Running Wolf considered her question with his customary thoroughness. "Words have power," he finally said, "but not truth necessarily." They saw no value because they looked only for what they understood: obedience, sons, social position. "And you saw something different?" He nodded. "Saw woman fighting when easier to surrender. Saw hands willing to work, mind willing to learn." His voice softened. "Later, saw partner who stands equal, who makes life richer by sharing it." Sarah blinked back. Sudden tears. Pregnancy had made her emotional in ways that sometimes embarrassed her, though Running Wolf never seemed to mind. "Our child will know both worlds," she said, looking out over the land they defended and nurtured. "Will that be a burden or a blessing?" "Both," Running Wolf answered honestly. "Two worlds not always peaceful together, but knowing both gives strength others don't have. Like tree with roots in two soils, harder to topple." A rider appeared on the distant trail, one of the Apache youth who carried messages between their settlement and Running Wolf's extended family. Sarah watched as her husband raised a hand in greeting, the young messenger returning the gesture before continuing toward their home. This was the legacy they were building, not just a homestead or a marriage, but a bridge between communities that had too long viewed each other with suspicion and fear. It wasn't perfect. There were still those in town who crossed the street rather than greet Running Wolf. Still Apache elders who questioned his choice to marry outside the tribe. But there were also children like the blacksmith's son, learning Apache woodworking techniques. Young Apache women studying the settler methods of preserving food that Sarah had adapted to desert conditions. A small school where both communities' children sometimes gathered for lessons exchanged in both languages. As twilight deepened into dusk, Running Wolf lit the lamps inside their home, while Sarah remained on the porch, watching the first stars appear. She thought of the frightened widow who had arrived here with nothing but a broken teacup and the weight of others' judgment. Worthless, they had declared her. Yet here she stood, a woman of substance and connection, creating a life that bridged worlds considered irreconcilable. Worth, she had learned, wasn't assigned by others' estimation. It was built through choices, through perseverance, through the courage to reach across boundaries when others insisted on maintaining them. Running Wolf returned, draping a shawl across her shoulders against the evening chill. His hand came to rest beside hers on her rounded belly, where their child, living proof of their unlikely union, grew stronger each day. "Come inside, wife," he said softly. "Tomorrow brings new work. And new possibilities," Sarah added, turning toward the warm light of their home.